Okay, how's everybody doing? Good. Good, good. All right, we're going to talk about wedges today, what I refer to as distance wedges. These are shots on the golf course that are not full swing shots, but they're not greenside either. So it depends on the player. Could be anywhere from 30 yards to even up to 100 yards for somebody who hits a pitching wedge a long way. For some of us, 100 yards is a 7-iron. It depends on how far you hit the ball. But these would basically be non-full swing shots, but not greenside either. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how we're going to hit this shot. But before we do that, any questions or comments from last week? Talked a little bit about driver. Was that last week, right? Yeah. Well, I got my week straight. So we talked a little bit about driver, continued on with full swing. Was there any questions or any follow-up that we needed to clean up from last week?
One question I have is, so I went and played class and the next day, and there was a couple times where I had to just back off the ball. I was thinking of all these different things. And is there one thing over another? I mean, obviously you got to put it all together, but as we kind of go further into this, is there one thing that you would focus on more than anything that will help overall, knowing that it's all comprehensive, but there was just a couple times I'm like, whoa.
For sure. So let's answer that in two different ways. First off, in general, right? So swing thoughts are important, but also can be, can interfere with what we're doing. So that's why people talk about being in the zone, right? Being in the zone is actually a neurological process. It's you're circumventing the prefrontal cortex, which is the processor, right? When we're thinking about positions, that's the processor, right? We're going, okay, here. So we're trying to play not doing that, but then when we're thinking about positions, we are using that part of the brain. So how do we get out of that? The way I talk about it is we have to think about it so we can forget about it, right? Because we're not going to learn it if we don't think about it, tend to make that motion. But when you're practicing, you have to try to start to wean your way off of those swing thoughts, and we want to think more about motion. Instead of positions, motion. So, for example, we did our trail arm drill, which has a whole lot of pieces to it, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there. The whole idea is to go through that drill and be able to feel those positions so that then it's like, boy, when I do that, I feel whatever that might be. I feel like my club is swinging out to the right, let's say. Okay, like you'll hear people say swing to right field as a swing thought or some things like that. That is the transition you want to be able to make, if you can, to the golf course, where you think about something, because I'll have players say, can I just go blank? Can I just think of nothing? And I said, that sounds really good. The problem is I've never really found anybody able to do it. So they start off kind of blank, and then they get to about right here, and the floodgates open, and now all of a sudden there's like a million things that start popping in there. So when we get into swing thoughts, we want it to be something more motion-oriented or feel, rhythm, those types of things. Finishing in balance, something like that. It doesn't have to be anything, and it doesn't have to be anything about even what you're working on per se. Because the idea is to train it, and then whatever's going to come out is going to come out. When you get on the first tee, you got to dance with the date that you brought, right? When you're there, you have to just play. So you have to kind of separate. I break it into training, practice, and play, and they're all interrelated, but they're unique. Training, we're going to be stopping, we're going to be fixing, we're going to be moving positions, really feeling it, normally slower, things like that. Practice is starting to put it into motion, but normally with some drill work, some without it, where you practice drill, and then go ahead and hit it. Drill, go ahead and hit it. So we're starting to try to get ready to play golf. And when we play golf, one swing thought is plenty. Sometimes you could do something on the way back, something on the way through. as far as swing thoughts. But yeah, positions are not great for that.
Yeah,
Does that help? I mean, it's a tough thing. Trust me. That's all I do is teach. So I'm having this conversation daily because we're talking about trying to get something new, but then go play golf. And at the same time, people will say, and I don't agree with it. There may be some isolated incidents, but I have to get better before, or I have to get worse before I get better. Or I'm taking lessons so I can't play for the next month. I don't believe that to be true. I'm not saying that you're not going to mess some things up on the golf course. And you might have a different miss or something that you're not expecting. Things will come up for sure. But I want you to go play. I mean, I want you to see how much is going to stick. And we might have a round that might not be as good, but if you're working on something, it means that there was probably something wrong. And so your scores may not have been as good as it could be anyway. So it's not like, you're going to go from I shot 72 to now, okay, I shot 80. If you're shooting 72, you probably don't have a whole lot of stuff to work on. So I don't think that you have to not play golf while you're getting lessons.
So the easy answer would be develop the habits and training practice so that when you're playing,
it comes out.
Okay.
And you're going to have something that might help with a trigger. But yeah, you can't play checkpoints throughout the swing and have rhythm. And tempo. Good question.
Can I get one more?
Yeah.
So for the driver, the woods, and the long irons, when we spoke about the swing last time,
Yes.
where is the hand position with respect to the?
Good question.
We didn't hear that.
So as far as where your hands as you're set up here, so in general, your hands are really almost in the same place for every golf club, but where the head of the club is different.
Right.
And that's why, so I brought my wedge, you can see that's really the shaft is leaning forward, whereas a driver doesn't. It's more like this. So the easiest way to do it is, as far as saying where should we be, if you get into your posture and then you do your side tilt and you just let your lead arm hang down, it's going to typically be kind of right on the inside of your lead leg, and then your trail arm kind of swings in to here. This is pretty much where they'll be. It'll move a little bit for each player based on physical things.
Okay.
But that's about where it is. So then when you have a wedge, the hands are here, but the ball is in the middle of your stance, so the club is, and that's why that matches with the club being angled. Whereas with the driver, there's no angle in that shaft, or very little. Some of them were even actually angled slightly back. So your hands are still in the same spot. So you shouldn't move. Another way to think about it is this, if this was a flashlight, it should point kind of like towards this hip socket where your leg comes in and hooks into your, right about there is about where that goes. So they're just slightly on the forward side.
Okay.
Now, some players will play with them right in the middle. We definitely see that. It messes with the club face a little bit, so we just have to get all that right if somebody needs to do that for some reason. But that's generally it.
All right. Thank you.
Good? All right, what else? Anything else? Okay, so we're going to talk about these distance wedges, and we're going to spend a couple minutes on kind of a little bit of methodology or philosophy, whatever you want to call it, on understanding these shots, and then we'll talk about the specifics on how to perform these shots. So most players will tell me if they're hitting a shot like this, I'll ask them, what's your plan? And if they're honest, they'll say, I don't have a plan. I'm just going to kind of swing and hope it goes about the right distance. But normally what they say is, I play by feel on these shots, which is code for I don't have a plan. So they play by feel, which is not incorrect, right? Feel is an important part of everything that we do, but these shots for sure. But that's not a plan. What that means is if I mess it up, I can just say, wow, I just didn't get that feel right, and it's like an excuse to not perform well. And so we don't want that, right? If you are, let's just call it 110 yards out, you have a club that you hit that far. So it's like, okay, I'm that far out, that's what I'm doing. I grab my club and I just go ahead and hit that shot. That is the same thing that we're going to do with wedges. So if you shoot your yardage and it says 40 yards or 50 yards, you're going to be able to look at your sheet and say, oh, okay, this is the shot I'm going to hit. And that is really important because these shots become super critical for score. Because oftentimes we'll say we're on a par 5 and we hit a couple good shots and we're down there close, we can really capitalize on hitting a shot like this. Or on a shorter hole where we're in a shorter distance to the green, hitting that in. Or like me, when I hit my driver in the trees and I have to punch it out, but I can't reach the green, but I can get it down there kind of close, then I can execute this wedge shot to still give me a fighting chance for a good score on that hole. So there's a lot of different times that this shot can become very, very helpful for score. So to be able to hit these shots and know the yardage and have them written down, I have in the academy, I have it's funny, I just did this last night because I was working on this shot with a player that I was working with last night, and I still have this up. It's been up and open in my tab on the internet, or on my Safari tab for probably a year and a half, and I had to look and said, oh, maybe it's still in there, but it is. So I just pulled it up, and because I just never closed that, and what it is it's Brooks Koepka's yardage book that he has with him on the golf course. And in his little book that you probably see players on tour, they're standing there with their caddy and they're talking, they both have books out and they're looking at stuff. And in he has his yardages on every golf club. He has wedges categorized the way he does it. Everybody does it, their own way. He calls it small, medium, 3/4, full, and max. So it doesn't really matter, whatever. You call them A, B, C, and D, and E if you really want to. But he has a yardage for each one of his wedges. He has 5 different yardages based upon a shot that he does, that he knows that if I hit that shot with this club, this is how far it's going. And we'll talk about what I mean by that shot in a minute. And then he actually even has driver, he just has his yardage down. But then from 3 wood all the way through the rest of his bag, he has 3/4, what he calls full, and what he calls max. So he has 3 yardages on every other club in his bag. Now, here's one of the best players in the world that is paying a caddy to have all this information, and he still has it written down in a book, and he plays golf virtually every day. But we want to commit it to memory, that we know that what we're going to do and all that. We don't want to have all this going on. And it's like, this sheet is really important. So I'm going to talk to you about what it should look like when we finish up, as far as what your sheet would look like for these yardages. So we're going to copy some of the best players in the world from the standpoint of being able to know, when I hit a good shot with this, I'm going to do it. Now, sometimes we don't perform well. That's okay. But there's nothing worse than performing the task exactly how you wanted to, and then you get a bad result because you thought it was going to go 50 yards and it went 60 yards, or it went 30 yards, or whatever it might be. And so we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. So for these shots, we're going to hit our wedges with this. So there's all sorts of equipment out there. I have 4 wedges. So I have a lob wedge, which is for me is a 60-degree wedge. A 58 would also be considered a lob wedge. I have a sand wedge, which is 56 degrees of loft. I have a gap wedge, which is 50 degrees of loft, and then I have my pitching wedge, which is just what came in my set. So I have those 4 wedges. You don't have to have 4 wedges. Some have a 5th wedge. I know some players that have even more. But it's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 wedges. And the reason for it is pitching wedge used to be the most lofted club. That was the most lofted club going way back in the day. And then the sand wedge came along, and so, mainly to play the ball out of the sand with a different bottom, the bottom of the club, the bounce of the club. So if you see the word bounce, or you'll see some of the numbers on the club, the bounce is the angle of the bottom of the club. So if I'm holding it upside down this way, the sand wedge is angled this way, the bottom of it. So the back end, the trail edge, is actually, when it's upside down like this, is actually higher. So if I set this down here, the leading edge of this club is actually not on the ground. And that's designed so that it slides through the sand. It doesn't grab the sand as nearly as much, which is also why you'll see some players, they really like to open the club face up in the bunker. That increases the bounce even more. With today's clubs, you really don't need to do that a whole lot, but some players still do that. So then the sand wedge came along, which was more lofted than the pitching wedge. And then over time, they were like, ooh, we should add more loft. So then a lob wedge came in, so that now we have 60 degrees. Now you can even get 62 and 64. So then they had a lob wedge. And then what started happening, the irons, all of the clubs started going further. So this started probably back in the 80s and 90s when we started having perimeter weighting. They moved the weight of the clubs around, and all of a sudden the pitching wedges, you could hit it further. So I didn't change anything, but all of a sudden my clubs are going further. So then you started to have a gap in loft between your pitching wedge and the sand wedge. Hence the gap wedge, which fits in between there. So that's kind of the 60-second history of wedges as far as why we have all these different wedges. It would be great if we just called all of our clubs, we would go 8-iron, 9-iron, 10-iron, 11-iron, 12-iron, right? It would be a lot easier for us to do that, but we don't do that in golf. We make things as hard as possible, like call clubs woods that are made of not wood anymore. So that's what we're doing with these wedges, and that's why we need to have a sheet, because any of the wedges that you have that you learn your shot with, you're going to have different yardages that you need to be able to keep track of.
Gene, do you have different flanges on those 4 wedges, or they all the same?
Yes. So good question. So on the wedges, so the way I recommend it, what I do on my most lofted wedge, I have less bounce. And then on my sand wedge, I have more bounce. So, and here's why. The most lofted club, so for me, my 60 degree, this is a versatile tool that I use around the greens to do different things. I open the club face up a little bit. So by not having a lot of bounce on there, when I can do that and open that up. And then on my 56, I don't really hit that club like that, but I like having a little more bounce, so there's certain sands that are better to have more bounce on the club, so we'll do that. So that's one difference, but then also even the thickness of the flange. So some are a little wider, some are narrower, some of them have different grinds on there. You just want to practice with them and try to hit them and actually do a wedge fitting to see which one you like. Or which one performs is what I should say.
Can you say, you're saying more people now are using 56 as a sand wedge. So is that flange prepared for sand shots?
Yes.
Every time you put up a 56?
Yeah, all of those should be. I'm going to say all, and then you'll find one that doesn't. But I don't know of any 56-degree wedge that doesn't have the bounce that is suited for hitting out of the bunkers. Yeah, all of them have bounce on them. Some are more than others. You'll see normally 8 would be the lowest on a sand wedge, the lowest amount, and 16 would be kind of the high end. Most of them are between 10 and 12, maybe 14 degrees, something like that, on bounce. Yeah. So
like driver should be getting fitted for wedges.
Yes. Yes. At the very least, you should be at least practicing with some of them to see, because different swing flaws are better for different bounces and things like that. So the last thing you want to do is go buy a wedge and it works against what you're doing in your golf swing, and then you're like, this thing doesn't work. Just spent that money on it, doesn't. So yes, there's actually wedge fittings that you can do, which doesn't take very long, but yeah, it's definitely worth it. Yep. All right, so now hitting this shot, like many things in golf, it seems a little bit contradictory, but we actually want this shot to be a little bit lower than we would if we were hitting a full swing shot with a wedge. So this ball, we're gonna intentionally launch this ball a little bit lower, and we're gonna try to increase the spin. So we want this ball to go out and spin and stop. We don't want the ball to release and roll on the green because we want to be able to hit it to a target and just let it stop pretty close to where it lands. So in order to do that, we set up differently for this shot than we do a full swing shot. So here's your setup for this shot. Stance is going to be slightly narrower. Doesn't have to be, it's not going to be really narrow like a greenside shot. Like when you start doing some stuff with Brian on short game, he'll talk about that. But we don't want to be super narrow because we're still making a swing. It's not going to be all the way to the top, but we're still making a swing. So, but it might be a little bit narrow. Normally, I say 4 to 6 inches in between the heels is a pretty good starting point, and then you might go a little wider, a little bit narrower, whatever is comfortable for you. And then the front foot is going to be flared out towards the target. Back foot is normally pretty square, but it can be a little bit flared too if that's more comfortable for you. Ball position is going to go towards your back foot. Our weight, actually, we're going to shift, and we're going to put 60 to 70% of our weight on our front foot and make sure that our hands are in front of that golf ball as well. So we have a lot of little adjustments on this shot, and all of these are designed for the two things that we just said, to make the ball launch a little lower with more spin. So all of these are designed to help with in those two categories. So again, it's going to be slightly narrower, front foot flared, ball's going to be back, hands and weight are going to be towards the target. So when we're set up something like this. Now, in the swing, we really don't transfer our weight back to our trail foot, forward to our lead foot. We just keep it where we started, so it's almost kind of like pivoting on that front foot is really what we're doing. Now, we only had 60 to 70 on there, so we're gonna put more on there by the time we get to the finish of the swing, so we'll end up with, whatever, 95 on this side. But we don't really move back and forth because with this short of a swing, we don't wanna have to time all that up. We just wanna know that the ball's there, we're set, and we're ready to go. We just kind of pivot and go. And we're not trying to maximize distance, we're trying to get a specific distance. And while we're talking about that, don't fall into the trap of saying, I want to hit this club 70 yards, or I want to hit this club 50 yards. No. We're going to learn how to execute this shot properly, and then we're going to measure it, and whatever it is, it is. Just like your 8-iron goes whatever it goes, right? We don't get to say, hey, you know what, I'd like to hit my 8-iron 210 yards. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Nope, that doesn't work. So we're going to, whatever it goes, it goes. Because that's going to be your true shot. This was actually taken from Phil Mickelson when he worked, boy, I'm having a total blank. When he worked with, who's the short game guru that's a rocket scientist, or was a NASA scientist? Yeah, Dave Phelps, thank you. Sorry, total blank. And when he started working with them, they did this where Mickelson would hit the shot, and then he had somebody out there in the driving range that would radio back to them, because they didn't have launch monitors back then that would be able to do this, and radio back 72 yards, and they would do it. Phelps said he was standing out there, but I doubt that. I think he was standing over here with Mickelson, but he had somebody else. He had an intern standing out there with a walkie-talkie, and they would radio back the yardages. So rather than saying him trying to hit a yardage, he was making the swing that he was trying to make, and then they would just measure it. And so that's what we want to do. So how do we get these different yardages? Well, we're going to have 3 different swings with this club. You can call them, again, whatever you want to call them. We call it quarter swing, half swing, 3/4 swing. So I'm going to run through this, and you don't have to memorize this, because this will, if it hasn't already been sent to you, will be sent to you. So a quarter swing, we go back, and the club is about level to the ground. My lead arm is at about a 45-degree angle, so I have a little bit of hinge in my wrist. So it's not, moving my arms like this. It's a little bit of hinge in my wrist. And then when I swing through, I finish in the same spot. So this shot would be something like this. Something here to here is what we're really looking at. But notice that wasn't like a little baby swing. Even though it was a short swing, there was still, what I always tell my students is we still want a little zip on this. We want to have a little zip on this swing because we're not trying to hit it 10 yards. We're trying to hit it a distance. And if we don't have a little zip on it, we won't have the spin. And then the ball land on the green and roll off the back. So we still want to have just a touch of zip on that. A half swing would now be, go back, that lead arm is going to be about level to the ground. I try to stop just short of it because we normally go longer than what we think we're doing. So I just normally try to go just short of that, but a full hinge. And then on this side, we'll do the same thing. So we just mirror whatever we do here and here. This way to this way. Another alternative is you could do this and you could just finish out this way too. A lot of players like to do that. That's the way I kind of play this half shot because of that Cobra, L to Cobra drill, if you remember that early on. That's really what this motion is with just a little bit different setup. I did that drill a lot, so that's a very comfortable swing for me. So, but either way is fine. You can either go mirror it here to here, or we can go here to here. Either way as far as that swing. And then the 3/4 is basically the same as the half, but then we'll take our hands up to about shoulder high. And then when we swing through, again, we mirror on this side and go to about shoulder high. On the 3/4, my little thing to have you think about is when you finish, you want to be able to see your hands. So if your hands go back here and they go like a full finish, that ball is going to go probably as far as your full swing wedge. Because even though we swung 3/4, remember the ball is back in our stance and we're going to de-loft the club a little bit because of that. So, and it's coming out lower. So then it ends up going just as far as your full swing shot, which we don't want because we want different yardages. That's the whole idea, is to have different yardages. So, for me, my 60-degree wedge, quarter, half, 3/4, goes 40, 50, 60. Just happens to be that they're 10 yards apart. It's not unusual that we see that, but there's no magic to that. Mine just happened to be that way. So I have on my paper, I have the club over on the side, I have quarter, 3/4, or quarter, half, 3/4 on across the top, and then I just write the yardages in. So that we have it. Then I do it with my 56, and I do it with my 50, and I do it with my pitching wedge. Now what I like to do is, then you kind of have this box where you have all those yardages in there. To me, that's too cumbersome. My brain is not smart enough to look through all of that. I don't want to be on the golf course and be like, shoot, it's like, okay, 62 yards. It's like, okay, where's something close to that? Okay, all right, now I got to go. Okay, this club, this, right. I don't want to do all of that on the golf course. So all I do is once I create my grid, then I just put them in order by yardage. So I just go yardage, 40, 50, 60, whatever the yardages are. And then next to them, I have 60-degree quarter swing. Whatever it is, 56-degree quarter swing. So then I just put them through there. So what I have on the golf course is actually not the grid. I just have a list of how far by yardage. So if I shoot 62 yards, I can just go right down. It's like, okay, 65 yards this club. Okay, that's perfect. You know, I'll hit my 65-yard shot here. And so that way I don't need to mess with this grid as we do that. Does that make sense so far? So lots of little stuff on this shot, you know, and this is why people like to play by feel, because they don't want to go through this. They don't want to do it, but it's something that we need to really practice and feel. So if we run through it again, we have a little bit narrow, a little bit flared, and then the ball position is back, hands are a little bit forward, weight's a little bit forward. We leave that weight there as we swing. When we go into our backswing, that's what helps us to keep the angle going down and keeps the ball launching lower and increases the spin. And then again, quarter, we can go here to here, half will be here to here, and then 3/4 is going to be a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and then that'll create 3 different yardages. We do that with every wedge, and then from there, we can create all of our grid first, and then our chronological sheet. Now, swing flaws that you have in your full swing will appear on this shot as well, because this is basically the same swing as your full swing with a slightly different setup, and it's not as long. So, depending on any swing flaws, that could make this shot easier or harder than your full swing. So, and here's what I mean by that. So if I give you an example, some players, when they come back, instead of the club being somewhere around here in the backswing, they might bring the club back and wrap it behind them. They move their hands and they wrap the club behind them. So, and they might be a nice player, full swing, hit really good shots. They kind of go here, they reroute the club, and they come down. Well, what happens when you go to hit a quarter shot, there's not a whole lot of time to fix that flaw, because that flaw was in the very beginning of the backswing. And so then all of a sudden we can see some really, really squirrely shots, So just be aware that those swing flaws that you have, we all have them, they are still present on these shots. So again, it might be that because it's a shorter swing, it makes it easier to swing and avoid your swing flaw, and it might be that it makes it harder. Yeah.
Well, it would seem to me that there's the possibility of having an overlap on distances.
Definitely.
And so when you do that, are you considering then loft spin, carry, run up when you're picking your club?
Yep.
Do you have that overlap?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so when you go through all your clubs and you might have 2 different clubs, 2 different shots that both go 70 yards, right? Great. Now you have course management options. You can stand there and say, okay, which of these 2 shots should I hit? And the answer is going to be based upon a couple different things. It could be the flag's right in the middle, there's really no trouble, so it really doesn't matter, I could hit either shot. Well, then which one do I like better? Which one do I perform better? Which one's more comfortable for me, right? So then pick that one, right? We like those options. Or it might be a situation where you have a forced carry and there's not a lot of room before the flag. There's plenty of room beyond it. So then you might say, okay, which shot do I want to hit? Because one of them might release a little bit more. So you say, okay, based on that, I'm going to do that. Or there might be a slope right behind the flag. And it's like, man, I can be really aggressive with this shot, and if I hit it a little bit firm, I'm just going to go up that hill and I'm going to come right back down. And so like number 2 at Four Bridges, for those of you that played over there, right, if that pin is back, you kind of have a backstop almost behind it. So that's when I would hit more of a quarter shot if that yardage matches. If I had a choice between a quarter and a 3/4, I'd hit that quarter shot because it's going to kind of hit and kind of skip a little bit, which you'll learn the more you practice to see what your shots do. But yeah, then it'll release out. But yeah, absolutely. You're going to have some overlap, and then it's either going to be based on what the terrain is, if there's one that's better for you or not, and or which one I feel more confident in. What we tend to see, it's very interesting, but for somebody who has a really short, compact swing, the 3/4 shot normally is a little bit trickier for them because their swing is kind of like a 3/4 swing. And for somebody who has a really long swing, the quarter swing is like, it feels like a chip shot. They really struggle with getting that right away. So whenever I start with this, I always start with the half shot and let you learn the stance and get the half shot down, really get the half shot groove, and then go, okay, what's shorter, what's longer? That's normally the best way to go. And it's not always that case, but very common we see that, where somebody doesn't like the quarter or the 3/4. And that's okay, depending on how far you hit the ball. You might not need all of them. and that's great. If you don't need all of them, then you don't need all of them, whatever. So, if you might only end up with a half and a 3/4. You know, or I had one girl who didn't like that, so she called it 1, 2, and 3. It's like, I don't remember which way, I don't remember if she went 1, 2, 3, or if she went 1, 2, 3. You know, she did that all through her college career when she played, and she just said, this was my 2-shot, you know. It's like, okay, all right, good. When we're hitting that shot, you will have some overlap. And also, while we're talking about that, the quarter shot, so when we're hitting these quarter shots, the less the loft is, the ball will release a little bit when it lands. So if I'm hitting a quarter shot with a pitching wedge, because the loft is less than my 60-degree wedge, that ball doesn't check up as well, or it checks up, it just doesn't stop like a 60-degree will. So when you're hitting these shots, you're gonna find out, okay, this is the carry, but then you also have to have a good idea, okay, how far is this gonna roll? Normally it's not long, it's not like it's gonna roll off the back of the green, but it's a factor that you need to be able to factor in. So if the flag is on the front of the green, there's water in the front, you're probably not gonna hit a quarter pitch in there, because if you do, you have to land it over the water, so you gotta land it closer to the flag, and then it might roll beyond it, where you might have another option that would be better for that. So there are some little nuances on the quarter shots on the lower lofted clubs. And like for me, for example, I went through and I did 1/2 and 3/4 up my bag as well. I know what they do up to a 6-iron. I don't hit those shots very often, but I know what they do. So I know I have my yardages for a 1/2 6-iron, 3/4 6-iron, 1/2 7-iron, 3/4 7-iron. And the reason for that is sometimes you have gaps in between your clubs. And then also there are times where when you're playing, so a lot of time in the trees, driver's not always my friend. So I may not be able to hit the shot that I want to hit, but I have a safe window to go out. I just can't do it with the normal shot. So say maybe I'm 130 yards out. And so if I hit a 9-iron, it's going to shoot up too high, but I have a window that I can hit. I just can't get it as high as a normal 9-iron does. Well, I might look at a 7-iron. 1/2 7-iron is 130 yards, let's say. I'm just making those numbers up. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I can hit my 1/2 7. Now I don't flirt with the trees, and I can get that ball up there by the green. And it may or may not go right on the green, but hey, it's better than having to chip out and then have to hit another shot up to the green. So yeah, it's good to have your yardages all the way through, or at least more through, but I don't do anything quarter on those other ones, because the quarter is definitely not gonna stop with a 7-iron. It's gonna run out there. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, anything on these distance wedges? Yes?
Well, 2 questions.
Yeah.
One is, and you kind of answered it, I think, but there's nothing about the short, that half swing that will cause you to do the unmentionable. Is that, because that's where that always happens for me. Is there something
The
about
half-
that, or is that my bad?
Right, so.
That's purely my bad practice.
So we're talking about the times where the golf ball gets a little bit close to the heel, and sometimes it'll hit this little curvy part here, and the ball shoots laterally instead of forward. So very often the biggest cause on those half shots is fanning the club inside. So the 2 biggest causes of that are, and a lot of times it's both together, both of these. But either fanning the club in, because when we bring the club in this way, so for example, if I put this chair here, right, I should be able to hit these shots without touching that chair. If I go this way and bring the club in here, now I've created a really sharp arc that is in a very condensed swing. And so then my timing has to be precise. That's why we can still hit good shots. If we time it up properly, we can still hit really good shots doing that. But over time, It generally is not gonna get, because what happens is when we come back in, if we haven't gotten the club face squared up in time, and a lot of times when we come in this way, what really creates that shot is that our hands start to move away from our body, which is why then it hits in on that heel. The other thing to watch for is where's your balance point on your feet. So for a lot of times, it happens with this, but what happens a lot is when we swing, we lean in on towards our toes, and so now we've gotten closer to the golf ball, and so therefore the ball moves in towards that heel. So those are the biggest causes for that. There's lots of things we can do as well, but I would say 90% of the time, it's one of those two or both. A lot of times when this goes back here, we go forward as well, and so it's like now we got both of those happening. So fix is just put a stick in the ground, right? One of those alignment sticks, just put it right in the ground, kind of on your heel line, and then you can kind of start moving it closer and closer to get the feel of what that would be. And on the toes, what I always tell people is just kind of hit some shots and push your toes like you're pushing them, like you're pushing your shoe up. So the ball of my foot is still on the ground, my heel is still on the ground, but my toes are off the ground, and leave them off of there while you hit this shot. Now you can go like this and you can go through and put your toe down on that, but you just don't, because if you go forward, you're gonna know if your toes are up, and if you won't, you just won't do it. Our body's smart enough, that we can tell, like, okay, I can't go that way because my toes digging into the ground is what's keeping me from falling forward. Well, if I don't have that, I won't move forward. So I actually had a player who played a high school tournament, and he played with his toes up. He played like this, he was a lefty. And he actually put his toes up like that and swung, and then he would let it go and he went through. But he played the entire tournament. He was just doing it as drill work to get out of the shank shot. But it's like Baltimore, we can't say it, right? It was helping him so much, and he was going to go play in the tournament. He's like, I'm just gonna play that way, So he ended up playing a tournament that way. So yeah, so those are some things that you can look for on that.
Okay. And then the other question was
Yep.
measuring your distances. So the practice area we go to sometimes close to us has TrackMan.
Yeah.
Are they generally pretty accurate? Depend on how to set up. Because I feel like I hit my measured shots there 10 to 20 yards, generally less. What TrackMan says I've done.
So here would be my guess on what's going on there. So generally speaking, the technology is fine, not an issue generally, especially outside. Like we use the same types of technologies. Indoors, it's calculating stuff, so it's easy to get a calculation that where one number is slightly off and then it affects the outcome. But it's outside, it's following the ball the whole way. So it's not projecting what it is. It's actually.
It's off the launch speed and the angle. It's actually measured.
That's right. So if it's TrackMan, like TrackMan is that way, FlightScope is that way, because they use Doppler radar to track that.
Okay.
Now, the golf balls used is generally part of the issue.
Okay.
So if they're really golf balls that have just been beat and they've been hit a million times, that golf ball is not the same as what you're playing on the golf course. So sometimes what you do, the good news is normally it's consistent. So if you have a consistent pattern, once you see what you're doing on the golf course, you can kind of shift everything, and then you'll fine tune it a little bit. And you have to fine tune it when you get on the golf course anyway, because our tempo in practice is not always the same as our tempo on the golf course, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's like I hit these shots, they're all great, and I get on the golf course and I'm much quicker. So we have to, I'll always tell everybody, write your first one in pencil, because you might need to modify it once you get out on the golf course a little bit. But yeah, so generally speaking, again, the technology's pretty good. Technology's great, but normally that's accurate. But sometimes the golf ball is not very good, and so that affects our overall ball flight. Like even a range ball that's brand new doesn't perform the same as like a premium golf ball. So it depends on what golf ball you play as well. But if you're playing a premium golf ball, the range ball and the premium ball are not built to do the same thing. One's built for endurance, and one's built for performance.
Yeah.
So like if you do that, like here, they historically, I think they've had the Titleist golf balls out in the range. So it's nice because you're gonna be able to get a truer number.
Does the lie of the ball, does that affect which wedge to use ever, or should it affect it?
So, yeah, so on these shots, it does. On green side shots, even more, because that's gonna affect a lot of what you have to do on the green side shots. But, so the lie will affect it in a couple different ways. Number one, is it fairway, is it rough, right? So that will have a factor. Also, am I on an uneven line? Am I on an uphill, a downhill, side hill? So all of those will affect it. Rough, essentially what happens in rough, it's harder to get good contact on the ball. And depending on how the lie is in the grass, so just understand in general, and this is true for full swing shots out of the rough, the more stuff that's in between the ball and the club, the less spin you're gonna get. So that's why, like on tour, you'll hear them. When it happens, they try to cut the mics real quick because they don't like the less control they have, the more unhappy they are, obviously, because they're trying to be very precise with the shot. But when that ball comes out, it has less spin, and that's why they call it a flyer, because it goes, because there's no spin, and then when it lands, it's gone. And normally on tour, that's bad news, because normally long is dead on tour. Which is true on most golf courses, the backs of the greens generally are bad news. That's the factor of experience and trying to figure it out, right? How much is this going to do it, and how much do I do? And even they are out there guessing, right? They're like, okay, based on this, I think this is how this is going to come out. So that's a factor. But then also lie, right? So uphill, the ball's going to go a little shorter. Downhill, the ball's going to tend to go a little bit longer on a wedge. On a full swing shot, not as much, just because generally we don't contact the ball as well when we're on a downhill lie. So if the contact were the same, it would go a little bit further, a little bit lower, a little bit further. And then on a side hill lie, depends on how severe it is. So the more severe the lie is, a couple things happen. So if the ball's above my feet, so just remember the ball's gonna tend to go the direction of the slope. So if the ball's above my feet, the slope is this way, so the ball's gonna tend to go to my left when I'm hitting this shot. So then I have to factor into that, and also, I'm probably not gonna get very good contact on it. At least not right on the sweet spot, it's harder to do. So generally we need to plan for a shot to go further, or so I need to hit my 70-yard shot if I'm going 60 yards, type of a deal, because I need to kind of figure that out. And if it's below my feet, that ball's gonna tend to go, again, with the slope, so to the right. So those are definitely all factors. Most of it is contact. The contact gets swirly, and then it's hard, we're making our best guess. And the less stuff that's there, the more accurate your guess can be. But yeah, that's one of the hard things about it is we talk about all these wonderful things, and they're all on a good lie and everything. We get out on the golf course and we're like, wait a minute, I didn't have one of those today. I didn't have one of those flat lies in the fairway, right? Because you can hit it right down the middle of the fairway, and you're like this in the middle of the fairway. I mean, who says that's fair, right?
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because sometimes I prefer being like such a green side around in the rough, but now it makes sense because I get a good contact and everything, but it'll run a lot further than like I'm like, how did doing that?
That's
That
right.
now makes perfect sense. Okay.
Yep, the more stuff, and that's true about even moisture, right? So if there's a lot of moisture, and that's why I have to bark at all my students about cleaning their golf clubs. So these grooves in the golf club here are a major player in creating spin. Not just for wedges, but I mean for your regular shots. If we don't have spin, we are not going to control the golf ball. We have virtually no chance. And the same with dimples, right? So like the dimples on the golf ball are super important. That's why the range balls that get beat up, they don't fly well because the dimple pattern is gone. If you're bored sometime, go in and search, like they have videos on YouTube of dimpleless golf balls, and you should see what they do. They'll just fly and they'll just They just go down, they'll have tour players hitting them, and they're like, what in the world? Like, they can't, it just doesn't fly.
It's like a knuckleball.
Yeah, and then not only that, it's like, they'll dive, it's wild, it's like, they'll hit 3 shots, and they're all over the place, and they're pretty consistent, you know, so the dimples on the ball is part of the reason why those numbers get a little bit, suspect on the driving range, is one reason, but yeah, so the grooves, so you should clean your golf club after every shot on the golf course. Every shot. So you should have a towel. So what I do, this is my little lecture to all my juniors that are trying to play competitive golf and college golf. You take a towel. My golf towel is actually a bath towel. It's this big. I take it when I get to the golf course. I go into the bathroom. I put it in the sink and I ball it up. So about 1/3 of it is in there. And I just run the water on it, and then I just loosely wring it out because I don't want it to be dry. I want it to be wet. And then now I have 2/3 of my towel dry, 1/3 of it wet. So that then when I'm playing, after I hit a shot, all I have to do is go like that, and I'm done. It takes all of 1 to 2 seconds, and I've never really cleaned my clubs. Like, I didn't have to sit down and let them soak in a bucket to get all the stuff off of them and scrape up and do all that, because if you clean it after every shot, it's no big deal. But this interaction between the club and the ball is critical. So we want to make sure that we are controlling that as best as we can. So yeah, so we want to make sure that we have good, clean clubs. Not just because we want to keep them pretty. I'm a performance coach. That's the only reason I care. Right? If I didn't, I wouldn't care. Right? It doesn't matter to me. I don't care if your clubs are dirty. They can be dirty back here or wherever, but just make sure that this front is clean. All right. What else? Any other questions on wedges?
Well, the speed of your swing on these quarter, half, 3/4 is roughly the same, because I think those of us that tend to think we're choking our swing down from a speed perspective, I mean, all bets are off.
Yeah.
So your approach is shorten the backswing, get through the ball, but is there a great amount of difference between those 3 in terms of club speed?
Of actual club speed?
at contact?
Yeah, normally it's just a couple of mile an hour.
Yeah.
So like last night with the student that I had, I think he was like 58, 60, 61, and then 64. I think were his.
But that's because of the distance.
The length of the swing.
Not what you're doing.
That's correct.
generally.
Yeah, you're not trying, so what we do, so you're exactly right what you're talking about. You're spot on. The way we do it to make it non-mechanical is I have them hit, and first I just let them make sure it's like, okay, can we stop here? Can we do that? Right? Get the mechanical part of it down. And then I say, okay, on that last shot, give me a number 1 to 10. 1, that was the softest swing I've ever made. 10, that was the fastest swing I've ever made. And most people will say it was 5. They normally go right in the middle. It's somewhere between 4 and 6 is almost what they almost always say. And it doesn't matter. It's an arbitrary number, because then I'm going to see that and say, okay, I know that they need a little more tempo or a little less tempo, one way or the other. So if they tell me it was a 4, I'll say, all right, give me a 7 on this one. And so then that's your feel. That's the feel part of this shot. So it's like, okay. So it's like, okay, that's my 7. It's like, all right, that's good. And then do the 7 with all of the clubs, but because the length is different, the club head speed will be different. And the hinge. You hinge more between the quarter and a half. The 3/4 is really more the length that gets you the difference. So yes. Yeah, very good. Yeah, great question. All right, anything else? Okay. Next week, we get to take all of the swing stuff that we've talked about and throw it away and talk about course management, decision making on the golf course to take shots off our game without worrying about any of this stuff. So we'll be doing course management on some things on the golf course, and we'll talk a little bit about strategy and things that we can do on the golf course.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
On the position of the ball.
Yep.
You back toward your trail
Foot.
foot.
Yeah.
How far back?
I mean, you liked that I was very generic there, didn't you? So it depends. So each player, I encourage them to practice and move it a little bit. So some people like to lean their hands forward a lot. So generally that ball is gonna be less back. People that don't lean it as much, they're gonna be a little bit closer to that right big toe almost. So for a right-handed golfer, so they really have it back there. So and that's also part of why we narrow a little bit, because then if we're a normal stance, now we've got a lot of range here that we could have that ball position, but by narrowing it, it's really, you got about this much space to kind of play with. But yeah, so you just practice it again, whatever performs better. Whatever performs for you.
The tendency to basically scoop a wedge shot like that instead of sucker right straight
Go
up.
really high.
Not very far. That may say I'm too far forward, right? Or is it?
It could be, or it could be that that's your swing flaw, that's in your full swing, and it just affects wedges more because it goes so high. Yeah, so, but it could be ball position for sure. Yeah, because if we do this motion, the farther forward it is, the more loft is gonna be on your club by the time it gets to the ball. That's right. Yep. Yeah, so great little practice drill for you would be put that stick in the ground here, right along your foot line, and hit shots here where you don't hit that. Whereas if you do this, and if you flip your wrist this way, you'll nail that. Yeah, you don't have to play golf that way, but it's a great drill to get the feel of that, so that you're not doing this, which is super common. I mean, I don't know what the numbers would be, but I would say easily 75% of the golfing world. Easily. Good? All right, anything else? All right, we'll see y'all next week.